The book of Genesis covers 2,448 years, 3,924 BC to 1,476 BC, from Adam's creation to the Israelites' exodus from Egypt. It is a book of Jewish history from that time. It is probably the greatest book of the Bible because it describes the creation, the fall of man into sin, God's covenant with Abraham, how the Israelites are God's example for all mankind, and it establishes a foundation for all books of the Bible. Genesis 1, the beginning. There are several theories about the Bible's first two sentences describing the earth's creation. New Earth theologians believe that God created the earth and everything in it 6,000 years ago, per the lineage given by the Bible from Adam to Jesus. Old Earth theologians believe the earth is much older due to gaps in the lineage. The gap theory theologians believe that the earth is older, became void, and was replenished 6,000 years ago. It does not matter which you believe because it has nothing to do with our salvation. From a practical standpoint, however, I think that the gap theory makes sense and is supported by some of the scriptures found in the Bible. Other scriptures seem to discredit this theory. According to the gap theory, the angels, the sons of God, were created before the earth because we know they rejoiced when God created the earth, Job 38, 4-7. There was a time gap of perhaps a great number of years between Genesis 1:1, God created the heavens and the earth, and Genesis 1:2, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. God's earth initially was perfect, and he filled it with man and animals. Lucifer, God's most beautiful angel, decided he could be as great as God. He rebelled against God, and God cast him and his minion angels down to the earth. So after Genesis 1:1, God created the heavens and the earth. Lucifer, Satan, caused rebellion on the earth, and the minion angels, demons, crossbred with the women of the earth, resulting in giants, Nephilim, and an earth full of sin and corruption. It is possible that within this time gap, the dinosaurs and the Neanderthals lived. So God decided to destroy life on earth with earthquakes and floods. This was the first flood, the Luciferian flood. Then after some time came Genesis 1:2, where God replenished the earth. This gap theory is a theory based on many scriptures in the Bible. God would not create an imperfect earth. Everything he created was perfect except for angels and man, because he gave them free will so they could truly love him and others. The Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible states in Genesis 1:2, "And the earth became without form and void, and the darkness became on the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was brooding over the surface of the waters." This does not sound like an earth that God would make. It sounds like a destroyed earth. Also in Genesis 1:28, God told Adam to replenish the earth and subdue it. These scriptures indicate that the earth existed long before Adam and that something went wrong and it became void and covered with water. Notice that God also told Noah to replenish the earth after Noah's flood, Genesis 9:1. 2 Peter 3:5-7 speaks of three worlds, an old world, the present world, and a future world. But they deliberately forget that long ago, by God's word, the heavens came into being, and the earth was formed out of water, and by water, the earth of that time was also deluged and destroyed by these waters. By the same word, the present heavens and earth are reserved for fire, being kept for the day of judgment and destruction of the ungodly. Verse 13 goes on to say, "But in keeping with his promise, we are looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth where righteousness dwells." Isaiah 45:18 says, "For thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it. He hath established it. He created it not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited." The scripture tells us that Adam was created 6,000 years ago based on the lineage given, and we know that the earth is much older since fossils of both men and animals date back millions of years per scientific research. Although the Bible does not specifically tell us, the gap theory answers the time problem and why Satan was apparently already on the earth before Adam. I have often thought that when I see photos of the oldest statues of man, like the ancient pharaohs which date back to 4000 BC, 6,000 years ago, and maybe further, or the Great Sphinx of Egypt, men look the same as today other than the dress style. The Adam of the Bible must have looked like us, so men with enlarged heads, protruding brow lines, and strange facial features like the Neanderthals must have lived on the earth before Adam. In other scripture, however, when commenting about honoring the seventh day, the Bible says, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day." Exodus 20:11. It does not matter which creation theory we believe, since God did not place importance on this subject. However, it is interesting to hear views from other sources. Please watch this YouTube video to see what different religious leaders think. Next, God said, "Let there be light." He divided the light from the darkness and called the light day and the darkness night. That was the first day. God himself is light, so he must have provided the light until the fourth day when he created the sun. On the second day, he separated the waters, creating a vault above the earth, which he called sky or heaven, between the waters. Some think God used this water above the earth in Noah's flood. On the third day, God dispersed the waters on the planet, allowing dry ground to appear. The dry ground he called land, and the waters he named seas. God brought forth grass, herbs, and fruit trees. On the fourth day, he brought the sun and moon into place and set the stars within the vault. Humans would use them to mark days, seasons, and years. On the fifth day, he created fish and aquatic life in the sea, fowl, and birds. On the sixth day, he created cattle and all the other animal life, including man and woman. He created the man and the woman in his image, giving them high intelligence and a spirit. He said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." He was speaking to Jesus and the Holy Spirit. So we were created as spiritual, moral, and intelligent beings with physical bodies. God was pleased with all he created, and it was all good. All animal life and man were created male and female, and each of its kind. In other words, dogs were created dogs, and ducks were created ducks, so they did not emerge from primordial soup, as evolutionists would like us to believe. God provided the fruit trees and all the plants for both man and animals to eat. Since God was speaking to Jesus and the Holy Spirit, Genesis 1 gives the first mention of Jesus, the Word, as defined in John 1:1-4. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. He shows us his power and authority right off the bat. If God and the Word, Jesus, can speak material and spiritual things into being, it should be very easy for them to give us the things we need if we ask sincerely. In the following chapters, you will see that God used his great power to help humanity when they were obedient. However, he was quick to use it against them when they disobeyed. Genesis 2, God commanded man to be over the animals and said that all the life he created was to multiply and spread over the earth. On the seventh day, God rested because it was finished. He made the seventh day holy and would later pronounce it as a day of rest, worship, and a day to be highly honored, one of the 10 Commandments. Throughout the Bible, the number 7 is the number for completeness. On the seventh day, he rested because the creation was finished. So we have 7 days in the week, Animals were to be 7 days old before they could be sacrificed. 7 pair of each clean animal came into the ark. 7 stems on the tabernacle lampstand, 7 bowls, 7 seals, 7 years of tribulation, and many more examples are listed in the Bible as a sign of completion. Since a day is like 1,000 years to God, could it be perhaps 7,000 years from Adam to the final judgment? God had created man from the dust of the earth, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. God placed the man in a garden he had planted, located in the east, in Eden. The garden contained all the plants and fruit trees to give a man plenty of the best food to eat. He also placed the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the midst of the garden. A river came out of Eden to water the garden. Its name was Pishon. The river split to form 4 rivers. Their names were Pishon, Gihon, Hiddekel, Tigris today, and the Euphrates. God told Adam to take care of the garden and name all the animals he had formed from the ground. He also told Adam to eat the fruit of any tree in the garden except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If he ate from this tree, he would surely die. This was the first prophecy of the Bible. It was fulfilled when Adam died in 2994 BC at the age of 930. God made Adam's wife from one of Adam's ribs, and Adam named her woman because she was taken out of man. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. Genesis 2:24. Adam and Eve were both naked but were not ashamed because sin had not yet entered their hearts. Genesis 3, the fall. Satan was on earth before Adam because he was cast out of heaven along with his angels, demons, down to earth. Since angels do not die, Luke 20:36, Hebrews 1:14, Satan is still on earth and shows up as a serpent. He tells Eve that if she ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, she would be like God. She ate the fruit and convinced Adam to take a bite. This was the first sin against God by man's free will and Satan's influence. Sin had now entered God's refurbished world. Adam and Eve now realized they were naked and they were ashamed. They covered themselves and hid from God. God confronted them about their sin and advised them that now their days on earth were numbered and that they would die. God told Satan the serpent, "Thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly thou shalt go, and dust shall thou eat all the days of thy life. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise your head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." Jesus fulfilled this prophecy when he died on the cross and rose from the dead to defeat Satan. Matthew 28, Romans 3:24-25. In other words, he died to pay for our sins so we can defeat Satan if we believe. God also told Eve, "I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children." God clothed them with animal skins, which was the first sacrifice of an animal to atone for man's sin temporarily. God cast Adam and Eve out of the garden and placed an angel with a sword of fire to guard the gate and keep them out so they would never be able to eat the fruit of the tree of life. The fruit of this tree gives everlasting life. God said to Adam, "Because you have heeded your wife and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, 'You shall not eat of it,' cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles I shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herbs of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return." Genesis 3:14-19. So, a man who was created to have everlasting life in a perfect world now will eventually die. Will have to toil in the ground to be able to sustain life. and would need to make offerings to God to atone for his sins temporarily. As you can see, God gave man a perfect place to live with plenty of wholesome food in an ideal world, but sin was in the earth because of the free will God gave men and angels so they could love him and others. So Satan, a fallen angel, caused Eve and Adam to sin. Adam named his wife Eve, source of life, because she would become the mother of all the living. Genesis 4, Cain and Abel. Adam and Eve's first son was Cain, followed by Abel and Seth. Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain was a farmer. Abel gave God an offering of his best, and Cain gave an offering of fruit, which was not the best of his products. God was happy with Abel's offering, but not with Cain's. Cain then becomes jealous of Abel and kills him. So God told Cain that his farming would not produce products ever again, and he would be a vagabond doomed to roam the earth, Genesis 4:11-12, Jasher 134. Cain roamed the earth for many years, but later God granted him rest. Cain told God that he was afraid that others would kill him without his blessing. God then placed a mark on Cain that would protect him. So Cain went out to the land of Nod, east of Eden, and he and his wife would have a son named Enoch. We assume that Cain's wife was his sister because Adam and Eve did have other children, Genesis 5:4. The first humans would have had genetic purity, so marrying a sister would not have been a problem. The book of Jubilees, not part of the Bible, says that Cain married his twin sister Awan. Cain also built the first city mentioned in the Bible. The city of Enoch was named after Cain's first son. Cain's son Enoch is not to be confused with Enoch, the father of Methuselah, who descended from Adam's son Seth and was a very righteous man. The scriptures do not answer the question of who Cain was afraid of, since there should not have been other man on the earth at this time, or why he built a city if there were no people to inhabit it. So we assume that he was afraid of his own family, which could have been exceptionally large considering how long people lived at that time. Verses 18-24 go on to list Enoch's descendants. So Cain's descendants did not honor God, and that godless lineage would continue through Noah's son Ham after the flood. Later, we will see that Cain's descendants caused many problems, and his descendant King Nimrod built the Tower of Babel to show rebellion from God. Adam and Eve's son Seth had a son named Enosh, who began a lineage that worshiped God. So at that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. Genesis 5, from Adam to Noah, verses 1-32, lists the descendants of Adam from his son Seth through Noah. It also gives the age of each of the descendants listed. One of the more interesting of these men was Enoch, Methuselah's father, who was so righteous that he walked with God and he did not die. God took him to heaven, Genesis 5:24. Enoch was one of 3 men who did not die. The 2 others were Elijah the prophet, who was taken to heaven in a whirlwind by a chariot of fire, 2 Kings 2:11, and Melchizedek the king and priest with no record of birth or death, Hebrews 7:3. Some of the more interesting ages listed are Adam, who lived 930 years, and Methuselah, Noah's grandfather, the oldest man known at 969 years. He probably knew Adam, Noah's father. Lamech was a righteous man who looked forward to the day God would lift the curse Adam had placed on the ground through his sin. This Lamech, the descendant of Adam's son Seth, is not to be confused with the Lamech who descended from Adam's son Cain, who continued Cain's sinful ways. Noah was righteous like his father Lamech and grandfather Methuselah, who died 1 week before the flood. Lamech gave his son the name of Noah, meaning comfort. Lamech said that Noah would comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands, caused by the ground that Adam's sin had cursed, Genesis 5:29. Thousands of years later, Jesus would be born from the line of Seth through Lamech, Luke 3:37. Lamech died 5 years before the flood. Noah is described as a preacher of righteousness. 2 Peter 2:5. After the death of Methuselah and Lamech, Noah was the only man who had kept his belief in God and lived a godly life. A tree named after Methuselah, the Methuselah tree, is in a protected area in California. It is a bristlecone pine and is 4,769 years old. Methuselah comes from the two Hebrew words meth, meaning death, and selah, meaning sent. If it were formed into a sentence, it would read, when he is dead, it will be sent. In other words, when he dies, the flood will come, and he died 1 week before the flood. So Adam died in 2994 BC, Genesis 2:16-17, fulfilling God's prophecy that even though he created him to live forever, he would die because he ate the forbidden fruit, Genesis 3:1. Some theologians say man lived longer before the Noah flood because of the water that God had separated to be above the firmament, created a shield to filter the harmful rays of the sun, and that the high humidity produced better crops. They also assume this water shield was dropped to the earth during the flood. So after the flood, man's maximum life was only 120 years due to less humidity and harsher sun rays. Noah was 500 years old when he fathered his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Genesis 6, wickedness in the world. So during the time between Adam and Noah, Satan's demons, fallen angels, took the fair women of the earth and had children who were mighty giants and men of renown, Nephilim. Some theologians believe that Noah's sons told others about the Nephilim after the flood, and the stories were passed down through the years as heroes of old. Greek mythologies like that of Zeus and Norse mythologies like Thor came from these stories. If the gap theory is correct, this is the second time Satan has caused this havoc on the earth. God saw that men had become extremely evil, so he decided to give man 120 years to repent, and if they didn't, he would flood the earth. Genesis 6:3. Genesis 6:6. The Lord regretted that he had made the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. Genesis 6:7. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. Genesis 7, the flood. The flood came to pass in 2268 BC, Genesis 7:11. God told Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, to build a 3-story ark out of cypress, 300 cubits long, 450 feet, 50 cubits wide, 75 feet, and 30 cubits high, 45 feet, with 1 cubit high, 18-inch windows. A cubit is the measurement of the arm from the elbow to the middle finger of the hand, which is approximately 18 inches. Isn't it interesting that today's freight carriers have the same proportions after all these years of ship design and development? So God told Noah to gather fodder and food to store in the ark. God told Noah that he would send 7 pairs of each clean animal, including all that crawls on the earth, male and female, and 2 of each unclean animal to come into the ark, and that he, his wife, his sons, and their wives were also to enter the ark. So, according to their kind, 8 people and many animals entered the ark. The animals that were considered clean are animals with cloven hoofs, like cattle, sheep, goats, and deer, non-predatory birds, hopping insects, and seafood with scales and fins. Then God closed the door of the ark and opened all the springs of the earth and the floodgates of heaven, flooding the world and killing every living thing that he had created. He caused it to rain for 40 days and 40 nights. The water covered the tallest mountaintops by 15 cubits. The ark floated on the water for 150 days. Noah was 600 years old when the flood occurred. Genesis 8, God then stopped the rain and the fountains of the deep and caused the wind to start drying the land. The ark landed on the mountains of Ararat. Noah, after some time, sent out a raven and doves to see if they could find other lands. One dove returned with an olive leaf, and Noah knew the land was drying. So the earth was again being replenished, and Noah was 601 years old. So Noah, in honor of God, built an altar and made a burnt offering of some of the clean animals and birds. God then promised Noah that he would never again destroy the earth by flood. This is a good time to discuss burnt offerings. God said that the life of the flesh is in the blood, Leviticus 17:11. The only way to atone for man's sin is to shed blood from the best of animals he owned. Since all men sin continuously, this was God's appeasement until he sent his Son Jesus to shed his blood for all sins, past, present, and future, and gave them the hope of everlasting life. God hates sin, and to show people how much he hates sin, he required them to sacrifice their most prized possessions to atone for their sin. Since life is in the blood, the ultimate sacrifice is the shedding of blood. The thought of sacrificing innocent life had to be just as upsetting to the people of Bible times as it would be to us today. One of the most concerning questions of both children and adults is, why would a loving God demand that innocent animals would have to be sacrificed? The answer is that God could not tolerate men's sin, yet he loved mankind more than anything he created. He had to find a way to minimize sin in the hearts of man. Think of your pet. If you knew that if you sinned you would have to sacrifice the pet, you would be very, very careful not to sin. So men's sin caused the sacrifice of animals, not God. God loved man so much that later he died on the cross to absorb in his pain all of man's sin. From the beginning, God knew that men would always sin, and he would have to carry out his plan for the ultimate sacrifice to cover all sins. If all the greatest minds were brought together to determine what would be the greatest sacrifice, they would conclude that God would have to die. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, God, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. John 3:16. His blood would be the ultimate sacrifice and would eliminate the need to sacrifice animals. What greater sacrifice could be made than for God himself to die harshly on the cross at the hands of sinful man? The Jews, however, who never accepted Jesus as the Messiah, stopped sacrificing animals when the Second Temple was destroyed by the Roman legions under Titus in 70 AD. Today, they plan to rebuild the temple and start animal sacrifice again. They have already made all the utensils, altars, basins, and priest garments per God's descriptions he gave to Moses. They are also ready now to start sacrificing again. They have the 5 red heifers they got from Texas in 2022. The red heifer ashes are mixed with spring water to make a necessary cleansing solution before building the temple. This solution is sprinkled on the Temple Mount, the people building the temple, and all the utensils used in the temple. This solution is good for 100 days. Traditionally, this sacrifice was made on the Mount of Olives. The Jews have already set up an altar on the Mount of Olives. The problem is that the third temple must be built where the first and second temples stood, and in that location on the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock stands. It is a Muslim holy building. The Dome of the Rock would have to be removed to build the temple, and this would cause a significant conflict between Jews and Muslims. By the way, before we continue, if you would like this video to be a witness to more people, please take the time to like and subscribe. YouTube promotes the videos based on the number of likes and subscriptions. You can also leave a comment if you like. We read and respond to all comments, and we greatly appreciate your input. If you would like to be a witness to others, please use the share button below to pass on this video to friends or family members. Genesis 9, God made a covenant with Noah and his sons, their descendants, and every animal that came out of the ark. He told them to replenish the earth with man and animals. He advised Noah that they could eat the meat of the animals, but they must be drained of blood. He promised that he would never flood the earth again, and that the rainbow would be a sign of the covenant for all future generations. So Noah planted a vineyard and made wine. He got drunk on the wine and was found naked in his tent by Ham. Ham saw his father's nakedness and went out and told his brothers. Shem and Japheth backed into the tent in respect for their father, taking a blanket to cover him. The next day, Noah was distraught with Ham, and he placed a curse on Ham's son, Canaan. Noah said that Canaan's descendants would be slaves of Ham's brothers, Genesis 9:18-29. The Israelites would overtake the Canaanites later in history to establish the land God promised them. So, sin started again with Noah getting drunk and Ham's disrespect for his father. God previously blessed Ham, Genesis 9:1, so maybe Noah did not want to directly punish someone God had blessed. He did, however, give a prophetic blessing to Shem and Japheth's descendants and a prophetic curse on Ham's direct descendants, who lived in the land of Canaan that God gave the Israelites. Shem descendants were the nations of the Middle East, including the Israelites, God's chosen people. So Judaism, Islam, and Christianity sprang from Sham's descendants. Japheth's descendants were the Europeans, who are mostly Christians today, with Muslims and Jews being a minority. Ham's descendants settled in the Middle East and included the Arab countries, Egypt, and northern Africa. Today, these lands are the home of a majority of Muslims, with Christians and Jews being minorities. In Geoffrey Keaton's book, The History of Ireland, he says that the ancient Fomorians were Canaanites who did not want to live under slavery. They did not think they could survive a war with Shem's descendants because God blessed Shem. They took their ships and looked for other lands. They raided the coasts of Ireland, and they were the first pirates. Noah lived 350 years after the flood, and he died at 950 years old. Genesis 10. The Table of Nations. This chapter gives the list of nations, the lineage of Noah's sons, the Semites. Noah's son Shem's descendants created the lineage connected to Abraham and the Israelites, and they spread to Asia. The Hamites, Ham's descendants, are credited for the unholy cities of Sodom, Gomorrah, and Babylon, and the Canaanites. Ham's descendants also spread to Africa. Japhethites, Japheth's descendants, became the European nations. 2246 BC, Genesis 11. The Tower of Babel. After the flood, Noah's descendants did not spread out to inherit the earth as God had commanded. They had one language, and they wanted to stay together. They journeyed from the east and settled in the land of Shinar. Nimrod, the son of Chus and grandson of Ham, decided to build cities in Shinar, including the city of Babel, later known as Babylon. In defiance of God, Nimrod built a tower made of bricks and mortar of tar. According to Josephus, the Roman historian, in his Antiquities of the Jews 141-3, Nimrod wanted to build a tower so tall that another flood could not reach the top. The tower would be able to reach heaven and make a name for the Babylonians in defiance of God. God confounded their language so that they couldn't understand each other. Genesis 11:7. This caused them to scatter throughout the earth and create new languages. Genesis 11:8. The tower was called the Tower of Babel. This is the explanation of the diversity of 7,000 languages today. Prophecy tells us that during the future millennium, God will reverse this, so everyone speaks the same language and will be able to communicate. Babylon is used throughout the Bible as a reference to evil in the world. The spirit of Babylon is still present in all world nations, but in the end, God will overcome this evil spirit. Babylon represents the spirit of the world, which is in constant battle with the Spirit of God. Archaeologists have found evidence that the tower was left unfinished. In 600 BC, Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, repaired the tower and finished the top. The tower was 100 meters wide and 100 meters high. The Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology cites two discoveries that tell of Nebuchadnezzar's rebuilding of the tower: the Burr cylinders and the Tower of Babel stele. Isaiah 13:20-22 says that after the destruction of Babylon it would never rise again, and that hyenas and jackals would have their dens within the palaces. Both Alexander the Great and Saddam Hussein tried to rebuild Babylon but died in the process. The ruins of Babylon can be seen today, about 55 miles south of Baghdad along the Euphrates River. It is located in the city of Hilla, Iraq. Archaeologists say jackals and hyenas truly inhabit it. Genesis 11 goes on to list the lineage of descendants from Shem to Abram. Abram's father Terah had two other sons, Nahor and Haran. Haran, who died in their hometown of Ur of the Chaldeans, had a son named Lot and two daughters, Sarai and Milcah. Abram married Sarai and Nahor married Milcah. Terah decided to go to Canaan to live. He took Lot, Abram, and Sarai. When they got to Haran, they settled there. Terah died there at Haran at 205 years old. Genesis 12, the call of Abram. God told Abram, who was 75 years old, to leave his home in Haran and go to Canaan, where he would become the father of a great nation. God said he would bless Abram, and all nations would be blessed through him. Genesis 12:2. Hebrews 11:8-19. Abram gathered all his servants, his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and his belongings, and headed for Canaan. When they reached Canaan, Abram stopped and set up camp near Bethel. God appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." Genesis 12:7. This prophecy became the focus of the Israelites throughout history. So Abram built an altar to the Lord there at Bethel, Abram in Egypt. There was a famine at that time, so Abram turned toward Egypt, where food was more plentiful. As they entered Egypt, Abram told Sarai to tell the Egyptians that she was his sister. Because she was beautiful, if they thought she was his wife, they would kill him. So the Egyptians took Sarai to Pharaoh, and he treated Abram and Lot very well, giving them sheep, oxen, mules, manservants, and maidservants. God was upset about this situation, so he sent a plague on Pharaoh and his house. Then Pharaoh was upset with Abram because he had not told him that Sarai was his wife. Pharaoh sent them away with all he had given them. Genesis 13. Abram and Lot go their separate ways. Abram, Sarai, and Lot left Egypt very rich because of all they had gained in their travels. They headed back to the altar they had built in Bethel. By this time, they had so many cattle to tend between Abram and Lot that their herders were fighting, so they decided to split up. Lot liked the look to the east, where he could see the plain of Jordan, which had plenty of good land and water everywhere, so he headed toward Sodom and Gomorrah and settled near Sodom. Abram settled in the land of Canaan and Hebron. God gave Abram all the land he could see in all directions and said that his descendants would become a great nation. Genesis 14. Abram rescues Lot. Next, after some time, a war broke out between a coalition of eastern and western kings. During this war, the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah were defeated, and Lot was taken captive with all he owned. Abram and 318 of his men and his allies defeated the coalition that held Lot. Abram freed Lot and retrieved all his possessions. Melchizedek, king of Salem, probably Jerusalem, brought bread and wine to Abram and blessed him for defeating the enemies. Melchizedek is a mystery in the Bible. He was a perfect man called the priest of the on-high God and would rule forever, never die. Jesus is also the priest of the on-high God. So some believed that Melchizedek was Jesus who showed up to bless Abram. In Hebrews 5:10, Jesus is said to be called of God and on high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of all that he had. Genesis 15, the Lord's covenant with Abram. Abram is wondering how his descendants will be blessed by God when, at his age, he has no descendants, and his estate would go to Eliezer of Damascus. Eliezer was the man who oversaw Abram's household and all his possessions. Some stories indicate that Abram bought Eliezer as a slave when he passed through Damascus, and that Eliezer went with Abram to rescue Lot. God told Abram that as he was promised, he would have children of his own, and his descendants would be as many as the stars, and that they would be forever blessed, Genesis 15:4-5, and Genesis 18:10. This prophecy will be fulfilled in Genesis 21, verse 2, when Sarai birthed Isaac. Back in Abram's day, to seal a promise, animals and birds were slain, cut in half. The two halves were placed on the ground side by side. The one who made the promise would walk between the halves, symbolizing that if he did not complete his half of the bargain, he would be cut in half like the animals. So God told Abram to lay out halves of a 3-year-old ram, a heifer, and a she-goat, and to include a turtle dove and a young pigeon that were not to be divided. Abram fell asleep, and great darkness came over him. Then, in the evening, God's Spirit in the form of a smoking stove and a burning lamp passed between the halves. This set God's covenant with Abram and his descendants. God promised Abram that his descendants would be under siege for 400 years, and then they would be freed to inherit the land he gave them. Some theologians believe that the smoking furnace represents the 400-year captivity in Egypt, and the burning lamp represents the liberation of the Jews during the Exodus. Scriptures indicating that the smoking furnace relates to captivity are Deuteronomy 4:20, Jeremiah 11:4, 1 Kings 8:51. Isaiah 62:1 suggests that the burning lamp relates to the Exodus. The promise also defined Abram's land as from the river of Egypt. Scholars say it is the Wadi el-Arish River rather than the Nile to the river Euphrates. This land area would have to be taken from the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaims, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. Genesis 16, Hagar and Ishmael. After 10 years, Sarai had borne no children, so she offered her handmaiden Hagar to Abram so that she could bear him a child. When Sarai saw that Hagar had conceived, she was jealous and sent Hagar into the wilderness. The angel of the Lord found Hagar by a fountain on the way to Shur. The angel told Hagar to return to Sarai, and that her son would be named Ishmael. The angel told Hagar that Ishmael's descendants would form 12 nations, and they would be great in number, and that Ishmael would be a wild man who would be against all man, and they would be against him. Genesis 16:11-12. This prophecy was fulfilled in Genesis 25:12-18. The fountain or well was located between Kadesh and Bered and was called Beer Lahai Roi. Abram was 86 years old when Ishmael was born. Genesis 17. So when Abram became 99 years old, God told him that he would now be called Abraham, that he would be the father of many nations, and that the covenant God made would be fulfilled. God told Abraham that now Sarai would be called Sarah. She would bear him a son, Isaac, on that same day in 1 year. Genesis 17:21. This prophecy was fulfilled exactly 1 year to the day from when it was prophesied. Genesis 21:2. The covenant of circumcision. God said that as a token of the covenant, Abraham was to be circumcised, and that all his male descendants were to be circumcised at 8 days old. Isn't it interesting that most male babies today are circumcised during the first 10 days from birth? Doctors have found that the body is less susceptible to infections and affords quicker healing if performed within 2 weeks after birth. Circumcising was the first known operation. It dates back to ancient Egypt. Genesis 18, the three visitors. So next, 3 men, they were 2 angels and God disguised as a man, came to visit Abraham. Abraham had Sarah prepare a feast for the men. They asked where Sarah was, and she was in the tent. The men told Abraham that Sarah would have a son. Sarah heard this and laughed, knowing she was much too old. God knew that Sarah had laughed, and he assured Abraham that he would soon have a son. Sarah denied laughing and blamed it on Abraham because she feared she had offended God. God told Abraham that he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because the cities had become so evil. Genesis 18:20-33. This prophecy was fulfilled in Genesis 19:24. Genesis 19, Sodom and Gomorrah. So the 2 men went off toward Sodom, and God told Abraham he was planning to destroy Sodom. Abraham was concerned about his nephew Lot, so he asked God if he would destroy the righteous with the wicked. God said if he found 50 righteous men in Sodom, he would spare the town. Abraham continued to ask God to lower the number of righteous because he knew Lot may be the only one. God eventually agreed on 10 righteous men. The 2 men came to the gates of Sodom, where Lot met them and invited them to stay at his house. They ate supper, and before going to sleep, the men of the town came pounding on the door because they wanted to have sex with the 2 men. Lot offered his 2 daughters to them, and they rejected the offer and tried to break the door down. The 2 men, angels, pulled Lot back into the house and made the men outside blind so they could no longer find the door. The next morning, the 2 men took Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters outside the city. Lot's son-in-laws would not come. So the men told Lot and his family to run to the mountains and not look back because they would destroy Sodom, Gomorrah, and the other cities in the area. Lot did not want to go to the mountains because he thought he might be killed there, and he asked the men to save the town of Zoar and let him go there. The men agreed, and as Lot and his family headed for Zoar, Lot's wife turned to look back, and God turned her into a pillar of salt. God rained down fire and brimstone upon all the towns, killing all the inhabitants except those of Zoar, Genesis 19:24, prophesied in Genesis 18:20-23. Many think that the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah have been found around the area of the Dead Sea. They found that 5 cities were burnt to the ground except for one, which may have been Zoar. Please watch this video to see the probable location of the cities and the sulfur balls that rained down on them. Lot and his daughters. So Lot saw that the city of Zoar was just as bad as the rest, and to keep safe, he and his daughters fled to the mountains and dwelled in a cave. Lot was getting old, and the daughters thought he might die soon, and they were deprived of men. So they decided to be able to carry on the lineage of their father, they would have to get him drunk and have sex with him. They got him drunk on wine for 2 nights straight, and they became pregnant by their father. The eldest daughter named her son Moab, who became the father of the Moabites, and the younger daughter named her son Ben-Ami, who became the father of the people of Ammon. Genesis 20, Abraham and Abimelek. Next, we find Abraham and his family heading off to Gerar, where he tells the king of Gerar, Abimelek, the same old lie again that Sarah is his sister. So Abimelek takes Sarah into his harem. In a dream, God told Abimelek that he was a dead man because the woman he took had a husband. God also had closed up the wombs of all his maidservants in his house. Abimelek had not come near her yet, so he told God he was innocent. So God told him to send her back to Abraham, that Abraham was a prophet and he would pray for him. Abimelek took Sarah back to Abraham and asked him, "Why did you do this to me? You told me she was your sister." Abraham told him that he was afraid he would be killed, but that she was his sister because she was the daughter of my father, but not my mother. Abimelek gave him even more sheep, oxen, manservants, maidservants, and 1,000 pieces of silver, and told him he was welcome to settle in his land. Abraham prayed for Abimelek, so God forgave him and healed the maidservants. 1877 BC. Genesis 21, the birth of Isaac. So now things are looking up for Abraham. He is a wealthy man, and God decides now is the time to give him a son. Sarah had a son they called Isaac. Genesis 21, 1-3. Prophesied. Genesis 17:21. Abraham was 100 years old when he circumcised Isaac on the 8th day of his birth. Hagar and Ishmael sent away. Later, Sarah saw Ishmael mocking Isaac and told Abraham to send Hagar and Ishmael away. Abraham was grieved because of Ishmael, but God told him to send them off, and he would make a great nation of Ishmael. With God's help, they went off. Ishmael became an archer, settled in Paran, and took a wife from Egypt that Hagar had gotten him. Ismael's descendants would become the 12 Arab tribes and Muhammad the Muslim leader. The treaty at Beersheba. Meanwhile, some of Abimelek's men had violently taken some well water, and Abimelek, knowing God's favor toward Abraham, decided to come along with his chief captain, Phicol, to talk it over. Abraham and Abimelek made a covenant to trust each other, and Abraham gave Abimelek sheep, oxen, and 7 ewe lambs, young unweaned female sheep. The ewe lambs were for a separate covenant to commemorate that he dug a new well there at Beersheba. So Abimelek and Phicol returned to their land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a grove in honor of God there at Beersheba. Genesis 22. Abraham tested. God decided to test Abraham's faith, so the angel of the Lord told Abraham to gather firewood for a burnt offering of his son Isaac. Abraham took 2 of his young men, a mule, the firewood, and Isaac, and went to the land of Moriah as God had instructed. After the 3-day trip, they could see the mountaintop. Abraham told the 2 young men to wait for his return, and took Isaac to the mountaintop. As Abraham prepared an altar, Isaac asked where the lamb was for the offering. Abraham then bounded Isaac and laid him on the altar, a rock area on the top of the mountain. As he was about to kill Isaac with a knife, an angel stopped him because he had passed the test of his faith in God. Abraham saw a ram caught in a thicket by his horns, and he sacrificed the ram to God. This was a foreshadowing of God sacrificing his only son. Abraham named the altar spot Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide, at the top of Mount Moriah. The angel of the Lord told Abraham that because he was prepared to sacrifice his son, his descendants would be multiplied like the stars in heaven, and that they would be blessed. Genesis 22:17-18. This prophecy has come true through the years. Abraham, Isaac, and the 2 young men went back to Beersheba. The angel of the Lord was Jesus, based on other scriptures. Today, the rock area on top of Mount Moriah is called the Temple Mount, named for Solomon's temple. The temple was destroyed when Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian Empire captured the Jewish people in 587 BC. It is also where the Second Temple was built after Cyrus the Great of the Persian dynasty defeated Nebuchadnezzar and sent the Jews back to Jerusalem. The Second Temple was completed in 515 BC by Herod the Great. The Second Temple was built on the same site and was destroyed by Titus and the Roman army in 70 AD. Later, the Dome of the Rock, an Islamic shrine, was built on the same site in 692 AD. It still stands today after being rebuilt in 1022 AD. It is the spot where Jews believe God created the earth and Adam. Muslims believe it's the spot that Muhammad ascended to heaven and returned the same night. The Jews believe that the Jewish temple must be rebuilt on the same spot before their Messiah can come. It is obvious that the Temple Mount in Jerusalem is a holy place for Jews, Muslims, and Christians, and because of that, it is the cause of many wars throughout history. Jerusalem is where Jesus was crucified and ascended to heaven from the Mount of Olives, the same place he will return to begin the millennium of world peace. Jesus will return at the end of the tribulation, and when his foot lands on the Mount of Olives just across from the eastern gate of the wall of Jerusalem, an earthquake will cause the mount to split across the Kedron Valley and up to the eastern gate, Zechariah 14:4. Jesus will walk into the city through the valley created by the earthquake. He will walk through the eastern gate, which was closed and blocked up by the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent in 1541 AD. Suleiman knew the prophecy of Ezekiel 44:1-3 and blocked the gate to keep Jesus from entering. He also built a cemetery in front of the gate. Many believe that the earthquake causes the ground to split below the eastern gate and the blocks will fall into the ravine so Jesus can walk through the gate. It's interesting that recently a group of investors wanted to build a complex on the Mount of Olives. They had to get a geological survey of the area. The survey found that there is a fault line beneath the Mount of Olives and the eastern gate of Jerusalem. President Trump moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in 2018. Jerusalem officially became recognized as the capital of Israel in 1948 when Israel became a state. Even though Jerusalem has been the capital since King David's time in 1000 BC, Palestinians have contested this because they say it is their capital. The videos below show the history of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. Genesis 23, the death of Sarah. Sarah was 127 years old when she died. Abraham requested a field from the children of Heth to bury Sarah. The field had a cave, the cave of Machpelah, owned by Ephron, the son of Zohar, a Hittite. Ephron offered the field for no charge, but Abraham insisted on paying the going price of 400 shekels of silver. So Abraham buried Sarah in the cave in Mamre, also known as Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Genesis 24, Isaac and Rebekah. Abraham was very old and wanted to multiply his descendants as God had planned and needed a wife for Isaac. He did not want Isaac to have a Canaanite wife, so he sent his eldest servant Put back to his homeland in Mesopotamia to find a wife. He asked Put to swear that he would not bring back a Canaanite woman by placing his hand behind Abraham's thigh, which was the symbolic way of the day. So Put complied and reluctantly took 10 camels, a few manservants, and plenty of goods and traveled to the city of Nahor. Abraham had told him an angel would follow him and bless him. He stopped at a well outside the town of Nahor where, in the afternoon, young women came to get water. So Put prayed to God that the woman who lets down her pitcher to let him drink and water his camels would be the one for Isaac's wife. Before he had finished praying, he saw a young woman coming to the well to water her herd. The woman was named Rebekah, whose father was Bethuel, son of Milcah. She was the granddaughter of Milcah and Nahor, the brother of Abraham. Rebekah gave Put a drink and watered his camels. Put gave her an earring of 1 shekel of gold and 2 bracelets, which weighed 10 shekels of gold. Put prayed and thanked God for guiding him. Rebekah offered Put a place to stay. They went to her mother's home, and she told her brother Laban about the earrings and bracelets. Laban welcomed Put and his men and prepared a meal. Put explained to Rebekah's family that Nahor's brother Abraham had sent him for a wife for his son Isaac, and he asked if he could return with her. They wanted to wait 10 days, but Put asked to shorten the time, and Rebekah agreed to go at once. The next morning, Put gave the family and Rebekah many fine things, and Rebekah, her maidservants, rode the camels, and Put and his men headed back to Canaan. Isaac was out in the field meditating when he saw the camels coming. Isaac took Rebekah to his mother Sarah's tent. We assume to show her his mother's things so Rebekah could comfort him due to his mother's death. The two were married, and Rebekah comforted Isaac. Genesis 25, the death of Abraham. Abraham took a new wife named Keturah, and she bore him many sons. Abraham gave all he had to Isaac except the sons of the concubines he had, for which he gave gifts and sent them away to the east country. So Abraham died at the age of 175. Isaac and Ishmael buried Abraham in the cave where Sarah was buried. God blessed Isaac and his descendants. Ishmael's descendants are listed, and they lived in the land from Havilah to Shur. Ismael lived to be 137 years old, Genesis 25:12-18. Prophesied in Genesis 16:11-12. Isaac was 40 when he married Rebekah, and they had not been able to have children until Isaac prayed to God to give him a child. Jacob and Esau. When Rebekah was 60 years old, she conceived, and the two babies were already fighting within her womb. She inquired of God about why she was struggling. God told her the babies would become two nations, and they would be two manners of people, and the younger would be stronger, and the elder would serve the younger. The first baby was all red and hairy, and he was called Esau. The second came out holding Esau's heel. He was named Jacob. Now Isaac loved Esau because he became a hunter and brought home venison. Rebekah, however, loved Jacob. Jacob was a plain man who lived in tents. Esau was out in the field hunting and became faint. So Esau came to Jacob, who was making a pottage of lentils. Esau asked for some pottage because he was faint. Jacob said he could have the pottage if he would give him his birthright. So the birthright was to go to the eldest child, and in this case it was the blessing of God that the child's descendants would be the lineage that leads to Jesus, the Savior of the world. Esau did not think the birthright was worth anything to him, so he gave this most important birthright to Jacob for a pot of beans. As you can see, both Esau and Jacob sinned. Even though he wanted God's blessings and Esau did not care, Jacob was willing to con Esau. Esau sinned against God because he did not value his blessings. Genesis 26, Isaac and Abimelek. So another famine came to the land, and Isaac went to King Abimelek of the Philistines for help. God told Isaac not to go to Egypt, but to stay in Gerar and to settle there, and that he would give him and his descendants all that he had promised Abraham. So Isaac and Rebekah settled in the town of Gerar, where he told everybody that Rebekah was his sister, because he thought they would kill him to get Rebekah. Abimelek decided to take Rebekah, but found out she was Isaac's wife. Abimelek was upset with Isaac because he might have caused him or his men to sin. So Abimelek told his people that he would kill anyone who touched Isaac or Rebekah. Isaac farmed the land and became very prosperous. He had lots of cattle and servants, just like God had promised. Before long, the Philistines became envious of Isaac and filled up all of Abraham's wells with dirt. Abimelek told Isaac to move because he had become mightier than him. Isaac moved to the valley of Gerar and dug more wells. Again, the Philistines said the water was theirs, and they kept filling the wells with dirt. Abimelek, his friend Ahuzath, and his chief captain Phicol came to Isaac to make a covenant, because they could see that God favored Isaac. They had a feast and went away in peace. So Isaac went to Beersheba and dug another well called Sheba. Esau was 40 when he took a wife named Judith, the daughter of Beer, a Hittite, and a wife named Basemath, the daughter of Elon, a Hittite. This grieved Isaac and Rebekah because Judith or Basemath was not of their clan and were known for their adultery and idolatry. Genesis 27, Jacob takes Esau's blessing. Later, Isaac was old and was losing his eyesight. He called Esau to his side and told him to go hunting, bring venison, and prepare it for him to eat. If he did this, Isaac promised Esau that he would bless him and give him his birthright. Rebekah heard this and called Jacob to hurry and pick 2 kids of goats from the flock. She prepared the meat and covered Jacob's hands and neck with the kid's skin so Isaac would think he was hairy Esau. Jacob thought that was deceitful and that he would be cursed, but Rebekah said she would take the curse. She had him wear Esau's clothes, so Isaac now would smell and feel like Esau rather than Jacob. Jacob went to Isaac and deceived him. Isaac asked him if he was Esau, and he said yes. Even though his voice was like Jacob's, the feel and smell were like Esau's. So Isaac gave him the blessings God had given him and passed his estate down to Jacob. When Esau returned from the hunt and had prepared the meat, he brought it to Isaac. Isaac then knew he had been deceived, but would not reverse the decision. He told Esau that he would have a rough time, live by the sword, and serve his brother for some time. Esau was distraught and threatened to kill Jacob. Rebekah was worried and sent Jacob to her brother Laban. Rebekah told Isaac she was concerned that Jacob might marry a Canaanite. Genesis 28, Jacob's dream at Bethel. Isaac tells Jacob to go to Paddan Aram, the home of Bethuel, Rebekah's father. Isaac also told Jacob not to marry a Canaanite woman, but to seek a wife from Laban's daughters. Isaac blessed and told him he would be the father of a great nation, as God had promised, and Jacob set out for Paddan Aram. When Esau heard that Isaac did not like Canaanite women, he took one of Ismael's daughters, Mahalath, as another wife to please Isaac. So Jacob camped overnight on the way to Paddan Aram. He found a rock for a pillow and went to sleep. While sleeping, he dreamed of a stairway reaching heaven, and angels were climbing up to heaven and down to earth. God spoke to Jacob in the dream and told him he and his descendants would be blessed, and all families of the world would be blessed through him. God also gave him the land where he slept, and told him that his descendants would one day broaden their land in all directions. Jacob thought he must be at a holy place and a gateway to heaven when he woke up. He took the rock, set it up, poured oil over it to make it a monument to God, and promised to give God 10% of all the wealth he received. Genesis 29, Jacob arrives at Paddan Aram. When he came to a well with a rock covering its opening, herders and their sheep were waiting to be watered. Jacob saw a girl with her sheep coming to the well. The girl was Rachel, Laban's daughter. Jacob removed the rock covering from the well and helped Rachel water her sheep. Jacob told Rachel that he was the son of her father's brother and the son of Rebekah. Laban was happy to see Jacob and offered to house him. Jacob marries Leah and Rachel. During the first month, Jacob worked for Laban without pay. Jacob asked for Rachel's hand in marriage, and Laban agreed only if he worked for him for 7 years. After 7 years, Jacob asked for Rachel's hand. Rather than Rachel, Laban gave Jacob his older daughter, Leah, since it was customary to marry off the oldest daughter first. So to have Rachel, who he loved, Jacob would have to work 7 more years. Jacob's children. Jacob did not love Leah, and God felt sorry for her, so he allowed Leah to have children, though Rachel was barren. Leah gave Jacob a son they named Reuben. She also gave him another son named Simeon, another called Levi, and then another called Judah. Then she quit bearing children. Genesis 30. Rachel was upset that she had no children and was envious of her sister. Jacob told Rachel that God had held back her children, so Rachel gave Jacob her handmaiden Bilhan to bear her a child. Bilhan gave Jacob and Rachel 2 children, Dan first, then Naphtali. So Leah, not to be outdone, gave Jacob her maid, Zilpah, and she bore him 2 sons, Gad first, and then Asher. Next, Leah's son Reuben found mandrakes in the fields and brought them to his mother. Rachel asked Leah for some mandrakes. Leah told her she had taken her husband and now wants mandrakes too. So Rachel traded Leah a night with Jacob for the mandrakes. God allowed Leah to have another boy they named Issachar from this encounter. She conceived again and bared a son named Zebulun and a daughter named Dinah. So now God allowed Rachel to have another child named Joseph. By now Jacob wants to leave Laban's land and take his wives and children. Laban begged him to stay because he knew he had gained much wealth through Jacob's efforts. Jacob's flocks increase. Jacob said he would stay if Laban gave him all the future defective cattle with either all black or spotted colors. So they both agreed, but conjured up a plot to swindle each other. Laban gave his sons most of the spotted cattle so there would be very few to produce more spotted cattle. On the other hand, Jacob herded and fed all of Laban's cattle and made white sticks by stripping the bark of limbs of popular hazel and chestnut trees. He placed the sticks around the water troughs where the cattle drank and conceived. With the help of God, the offsprings were spotted. Jacob created a great herd and became very rich. Genesis 31, Jacob flees from Laban. God told Jacob to return to his father's land, so Jacob told Leah and Rebekah, and they prepared to leave without telling Laban. Rebekah took Laban's idols without telling Jacob. They went with their sons and all their livestock. Laban pursues Jacob. When Laban found that his idols were taken, he chased Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him at Gilead. God told Laban in a dream not to cause problems with Jacob. Laban told Jacob he wanted his idols back. Jacob allowed Laban to search for them. Laban went into Rebekah's tent to find the idols, but she had hidden them under the saddle she was sitting on. She told her father she could not get up because it was that time of the month. So Laban did not find his idols. Jacob told Laban that he had given him 20 years of labor, but he had been deceitful and taken advantage of him. Laban knew that God had favored Jacob, so the two decided to make a covenant that they would each go their way peacefully. They set a pile of rocks, had a meal over it, and agreed that the pile would be a boundary between the two clans, and neither would ever cross to harm the other. Laban kissed his daughters and grandchildren goodbye the next morning and returned to his homeland. Genesis 32, Jacob prepares to meet Esau. Jacob and his family headed back to Canaan. On the way, he met the angels of God, and he named the place Mahanaim. Jacob sent messengers to Esau to tell him he was coming home and bringing lots of cattle and wealth he had attained. The messengers came back with news that Esau was coming with 400 men. Jacob, fearing that Esau was still mad, split all his men into 2 groups so the other could escape if Esau attacked one group. Jacob prayed to God that he would be with him and his family, and he sent a messenger with gifts of his best livestock out ahead to meet and appease Esau. So that night, Jacob took his wives and children and sent them and all his belongings across a ford called Jabbok. Jacob wrestles with God. Jacob was left alone, and he wrestled with a man all night. The man was the angel of God, Jesus. Jacob would not quit wrestling until God gave him his blessing. Finally, in the morning, Jesus stopped the fight by dislocating Jacob's thigh. Jesus did, however, give him his blessing. Jacob could not believe that he could have the blessing of God because he knew he was a sinner and was not worthy. He was at his wits' end because of all the bad things he had done, and he thought Esau would kill him. In his state, he cried to God, and by wrestling with Jesus, he finally understood that God did love him and that he would always be with him, disabled but blessed. Jacob named the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." Jacob was a different man after wrestling with God. He felt strong and knew God had forgiven him for his past. Many think he wrestled with Jesus, since other scripture says that a man would die if he looked on the face of God. God told Jacob his new name was Israel, the man who wrestles with God. Genesis 33, Jacob meets Esau. Israel saw Esau coming with his 400 men. So he lined up his family with those he loved most in the back of the line so they would be last to die or to have the best chance to survive. He placed Leah's handmaiden first and then Leah and her children next. Then Rachel's handmaiden, Rachel and her children, and Joseph were last. But Esau was glad to see Jacob, and they hugged each other, and the past troubles were not mentioned. So all Jacob's family bowed to Esau. Esau wanted to know about the livestock he had met on the way, and Jacob told him it was a gift and to please take them because God had blessed him with plenty. So they parted that day, and Esau continued to Seir, where he was going in the first place. Jacob, now Israel, continued toward the land of Canaan. He stopped in Succoth, where he built a temporary house to allow time for his hip to heal. Later he continued the journey to Shechem, where he bought a parcel of land for 100 pieces of money, maybe silver or gold. Israel erected an altar, and he called it El Elohe Israel. Years before, Abraham had built an altar in this same area. Genesis 34. So next, Jacob's daughter Dinah went out to meet the other people in the area, and Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, took her and defiled her. Shechem wanted her for his wife, so he asked his father, Hamor, to go to Jacob and ask if he would allow Dinah to marry Shechem and allow daughters from both clans to marry one another so they could all live in harmony. Jacob told Hamor that if he had all his men circumcised, he would allow the marriage. Hamor agreed and told his men that if they intermarried, they would own much of Jacob's wealth. Then Hamor had every male circumcised. Jacob's sons, however, were distraught that Shechem had defiled Dinah. So in 3 days, when all Hamor's men were still sore, Jacob's sons went out and killed all of Hamor's men and took all the women, all his cattle, and all his possessions captive. Jacob was upset because now all the other Canaanites would probably come and destroy his family. Genesis 35. God told Jacob to go to Bethel and settle there. Jacob told his people to leave all their idols and earrings. He buried them under an oak tree, and they headed out toward Bethel, where he would build an altar to the God that always protects them. Jacob named the altar El Bethel. Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died and was buried under an oak tree Jacob called Allen Bakuth. God appeared again to Jacob and reminded him that his name was now Israel, that he should be fruitful and multiply, and that all the land that he had given Abraham and Isaac would be given now to his descendants. They journeyed toward Ephrath, and on the way Rachel had a hard labor, and she died when Benjamin was born. So Rachel was buried on the way to Ephraim. Jacob set a pillar on her grave. Next, Reuben, Israel's firstborn, slept with his father's concubine, Bilhan, and Israel heard about it. This is all that is said about Reuben and Bilhan at this point. Still, later scriptures show that this was a sinful and defiant act by Reuben, and because of it he lost his birthright, which was given to Joseph, Genesis 49, 3-4, 1 Chronicles 5:1. Jacob had 12 sons from firstborn Reuben to lastborn Benjamin. So Jacob went to Hebron, where Isaac was in his last days. Isaac was 180 years old, and Esau and Jacob buried him in the cave where they had buried Rebekah. Genesis 36. So Esau and Jacob went their separate ways because their riches were so great that they could not dwell together. Esau went to Mount Seir, where he founded the Edomites. His lineage, including the kings and dukes who reigned in the land of Edom, is listed here in Genesis 36, 1745 BC. Genesis 37. So Israel, Jacob, was now dwelling in the land of Canaan per God's promise. His son Joseph was 17 when he worked in the fields with his brothers. Joseph told Israel some negative things his brothers were doing. So things were not going well between the brothers and Joseph. Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons because he was his youngest son, closest to him in his old age. Israel made Joseph a coat of many colors. So because they knew Joseph was loved more, his brothers hated and mistreated him. Joseph started dreaming that he was greater than his brothers and that they would serve and be obedient to him. Joseph told his brothers and father about the dreams, Genesis 37, 5, 9-10, fulfilled in Genesis 42, 6 and Genesis 44, 26. Israel was upset that Joseph had told this to his brothers. So Israel's sons had gone to feed the flock in Shechem, and he told Joseph to go and check on his brothers and the flock. When Joseph could not find them, a man he met told him they had gone to Dothan. When the brothers saw Joseph coming, they plotted to kill him and throw him in a pit. Reuben heard this, and he told them not to harm him, but to put him in the pit alive. Reuben thought this would appease his brothers, and that he would return later and take Joseph to his father. So the brothers took Joseph's coat and put him in the pit. After doing this, they saw a group of Ishmaelite merchants coming with camels and carrying goods to Egypt. The brothers decided they would not kill Joseph, but they would sell him to the Ishmaelites, and they did sell him for 20 pieces of silver. When Reuben returned and found Joseph gone from the pit, he was upset and wondered what he would tell his father. The brothers then killed a lamb and put its blood on Joseph's coat of many colors. They returned the coat to Israel and told him they found it in a field and that a lion must have killed Joseph. Israel was overtaken with grief and said he would die mourning for his son. The Ishmaelites sold Joseph to Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard. Genesis 38. So here we leave the story of Joseph, and in this chapter we read about Israel's fourth son, Judah, from his wife Leah. Judah went to the city of Adullam and saw the daughter of Shuah, a Canaanite. Judah slept with the unnamed daughter, and she had a son they named She conceived again and had a son called Onan. She conceived again and had a son named Shelah. Later, Judah picked a wife for his eldest son Her name was Tamar. Now became very wicked, so God killed him. At that time, it was customary for a widowed wife to marry her late husband's brother so that she would not be left without support. Judah then told Onan to marry Tamar and have a child so lineage would continue. Onan went to sleep with her. He did not want the children of his brother's wife because, according to the law, his children would be heirs of his dead brother, and they would also get a portion of his estate. So Onan did not want to have children with his brother's wife, but he had no problem having sex with her. So as he was having sex, he let his semen fall to the ground. God was upset about this, so he killed Onan as well. Judah told Tamar to wait until Shelah was old enough to marry her. After losing 2 sons, Judah thinks Tamar is bad luck, so he leaves her with her father. Tamar was upset because she would now get no support from her father-in-law, so she decided to deceive Judah by dressing like a prostitute with a veil over her face. She sat along the road as Judah was headed toward the town of Enaim. Judah told her he did not have money when he saw her along the route. Tamar agreed she would hold his staff, signet, and cord until he could return the money. So they had sex, and later Judah sent his friend Hira back to the area to give the prostitute her money and to retrieve his belongings. Hira cannot find her because she is back at her father's house. Tamar is now pregnant with Judah's child. When Judah finds out about this, he wants Tamar put to death because she did this knowing that she was betrothed to his youngest son. But when Tamar showed proof of Judah's staff, signet, and cord, Judah's sin was as bad as Tamar's. Judah then took responsibility for taking care of Tamar from then on. Tamar had twin boys called Zerah and Perez. Genesis 39. Now, back to Joseph. Potiphar, Pharaoh's captain of the guard, bought Joseph from the merchants who had bought him from his brothers. God favored Joseph, and all he did was good and prosperous. Because of this, Potiphar made Joseph head of his household. God blessed Potiphar's house for Joseph's sake. Potiphar's wife was also enamored with Joseph and wanted Joseph to lie with her. Joseph refused because it would be wrong in the eyes of God and Potiphar. So the next time she approached Joseph, she pulled off his garment, and Joseph ran away, leaving the garment in her hand. When Potiphar returned, his wife told him that Joseph had tried to molest her, and she had his garment as proof. Potiphar then had Joseph put in Pharaoh's prison. Again, God showed mercy on Joseph, and he made him prosperous and good in the eyes of the guard. The guard placed Joseph over all the prisoners. Genesis 40. The captain of the butlers for Pharaoh and the captain of his bakers had offended Pharaoh, and he put them in jail. One night the two prisoners had dreams. They told Joseph they did not understand the dreams and needed an interpreter. Joseph asked them to tell him about their dreams and that God would help him with the interpretation. The chief butler dreamed of seeing a vine of 3 branches blooming and yielding grapes before him. So he took the grapes, pressed them in Pharaoh's cup, and gave them to Pharaoh. Joseph told the chief butler that in 3 days Pharaoh would pardon him, and he would continue serving him as before. Genesis 40:12-13. Joseph also asked the chief butler to remember him when he saw Pharaoh. Joseph wanted the butler to tell Pharaoh to free him because he had done nothing wrong. Next, the chief baker told his dream. He had 3 baskets of meat bread on his head for Pharaoh, and birds came and ate the meat bread. Joseph told him that in 3 days Pharaoh would cut off his head and hang him on a tree, and the birds would eat his flesh. Genesis 40:18-19. So it came to pass that in 3 days Pharaoh had a feast, restored the chief butler to his position, and hung the chief baker. Fulfilled. Genesis 40:21-22. The chief butler, however, forgot to approach Pharaoh about Joseph being innocent. 1698 BC, Genesis 41. After 2 years had passed, Pharaoh also dreamed that he was at the edge of the Nile, and he saw 7 cows come up out of the water. They were well fed and healthy, and they grazed in the meadow. Then he saw 7 thin and undernourished cows come out of the water, and they ate the well-nourished cows. Shortly, he had another dream. This time, a cornstalk came out of the ground with 7 ears of good corn, and then a second stalk produced 7 ears of poor corn. The poor corn devoured the good corn. The next day, he also dreamed about stalks of good and bad grain. Worried about the dreams, Pharaoh called all his magicians and wise men to interpret them. None of them could interpret the dreams, but then the chief butler remembered that Joseph had interpreted his dream, and he told Pharaoh. Pharaoh called for Joseph and told him his dreams. Joseph told Pharaoh that God was telling him in the dreams that the 7 healthy cows and the 7 good ears would bring Egypt 7 years of great prosperity, but then there would be 7 years of terrible famine. God gave the Pharaoh 2 dreams to impress him that the famine would come true, and to save Egypt, he would need to assign a wise man to manage the 7 good years, so Egypt would be prepared for the 7 bad years. Genesis 41:1, 25-30, 38-41. Fulfilled, Genesis 42:6 and 44:26. So Pharaoh decided to place Joseph over all of Egypt since God favored him, and he had interpreted the dreams. Pharaoh gave Joseph his ring, fine garments, and a gold necklace, and told him he would be second only to Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh called Joseph Zaphanath-Paneah, and he gave him a wife, Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. So at the age of 30, Joseph went out in all the land to gather up harvest during the first 7 years, and he stored it in all the cities of Egypt. Joseph had 2 sons before the famine came. Manasseh was the firstborn, and Ephraim the second. So the years of famine came, and it extended all over the earth, and Joseph opened the storehouses for the people of Egypt. Joseph sold corn not only to the Egyptians, but to other countries. Genesis 42. Jacob and his family suffered from famine, and he told his sons to go to Egypt to buy grain. So 10 of his sons went to Egypt to buy grain, but Jacob kept his son Benjamin home in case something happened to his brothers. So the brothers went to Egypt to buy grain and were told to see Joseph. Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Joseph spoke rough to them and called them spies. The brothers said there were 12 brothers, 1 gone and 1 at home, and their father in Canaan had sent the 10 to buy grain. Joseph put them in prison for 3 days. On the third day he told them he would bind one of them there in the jail, and the rest to take grain back to their father. Joseph told them if they did not return with their brother Benjamin, they would all be killed. The brothers knew that they were wrong to sell their brother, and that what was happening now was God's punishment. So Joseph bound Simeon in jail, filled the brothers' donkey sacks with grain, and hid the money they had paid in each sack, and they headed back to Canaan. The brothers found that their money was in the sacks when they got home, and they told their father what had happened. Jacob was very upset about the money being returned and was saddened that he had lost Joseph and Simeon, and now they would have to take Benjamin back to Egypt, so Jacob did not let them go back because he thought he might lose more sons. Genesis 43. As time passed, the famine worsened, and Jacob finally allowed his sons to take Benjamin and head back to Egypt for more corn. He ensured the money was returned and that they brought gifts with them. When they got to Egypt, Joseph saw that Benjamin was with them, and he told them to go to his home. When they got there, they were afraid, so they told the steward of Joseph's house all about the money they found in their sacks on the last trip, and they were returning the money. The steward told them not to be afraid because he was the one who put the money back in their packs. He also brought Simeon out to greet them and told them that the God of their father had shown favor to them. So they prepared their gifts for Joseph and bowed down to him when Joseph came home. Joseph asked about their father and his health. When they introduced Benjamin, Joseph was taken with emotion and had to leave for a while to weep. When he returned, he served the meal and gave Benjamin extra portions. They all drank and made merry. Genesis 44. Joseph had his men to fill the brothers' bags with grain and to hide his silver cup in Benjamin's bag. The brothers then headed home to bring the grain to their father. After they were out of the city, Joseph told his men to go after them, accuse them of theft, and find the silver cup in Benjamin's bag. The men brought the brothers back to Joseph, and he told them that he would keep Benjamin as a slave and the rest could go back to their father. Judah told him that if Benjamin doesn't go home, it would be too much for his father to bear and it would cause his death. Then Judah told Joseph that he had told his father that he would be responsible for Benjamin, and he begged Joseph to take him as a slave rather than Benjamin. Genesis 45. Joseph sent the Egyptians out of the room so he could be alone with his brothers. He then told them he was Joseph, the brother they sold to the merchants. He told them not to grieve about what they had done to him because it was God's plan to make him a ruler over all of Egypt. He told them to go home and bring Jacob and all the family and the flocks to Egypt and live near him in Goshen. Pharaoh heard about the plan and sent wagons and goods for the trip. Joseph gave them all new clothes, and he gave Benjamin 5 sets of clothing and 300 pieces of silver. The brothers returned to Jacob, Israel, and told him the good news about Joseph. Jacob's spirit was lifted, and he said he would go to Egypt to see Joseph before he died. 1686 BC, Genesis 46. So Israel took all his family and all his flocks, and he headed toward Egypt. He stopped at Beersheba to give an offering to God. God told Israel that he would be with him in Egypt, and his descendants would be a great nation. So Israel gathered his family and all that he had gained in Canaan and entered Egypt. Israel's family members are listed. 70 people went to Egypt with Israel. After seeing Joseph, Israel said that he was now ready to die. Genesis 46, 2-4, fulfilled in Genesis 51-8. Genesis 47, so Joseph brought Israel to meet Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked Israel his age. Israel was 130 years old when he came to Egypt. Israel blessed Pharaoh, and Pharaoh told him that he would live in the best land, the land of Ramesses. The famine was so great that Joseph had collected almost all the money of the Egyptians and the Canaanites, selling them corn. When all the money was in Pharaoh's hands, Joseph accepted cattle and land for corn. The only land he did not buy was land belonging to the priests. Pharaoh fed the priests so they did not have to sell their land. Since Pharaoh had saved everyone from starving, Joseph required that they give Pharaoh a fifth of all their future profits. So Israel dwelt in the land of Goshen for 17 years, and he became very prosperous as God had promised. Israel was ready to die, and he had Joseph promise to bury him back in Canaan. Genesis 48. Israel called Joseph and Joseph's 2 younger sons, born in Egypt, to come to his bedside. Joseph and his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, came to Israel, and Israel told Joseph that the sons he had in Egypt were his as well, and he wanted to bless them. Israel placed his right hand on Ephraim's head and his left hand on Manasseh. Joseph objected because the oldest child should be given the birthright with the right hand. Israel said that Manasseh would be a great nation. However, Ephraim would be the greatest and would become multiple nations. So Israel blessed them and told them that God would now bless them. Israel told them their descendants would again go to Canaan and become a great nation. He also gave Joseph the land of Shechem as an extra portion. Shechem was the land that Israel's sons had taken because of the rape of Dinah. Genesis 49. Jacob called all his sons to bless them and prophesy their future. Jacob rebuked Reuben, Simeon, and Levi for their past sins. Reuben had raped Bilhah, and he was unstable, so all the brothers would share his birthright, and Reuben would not excel. No kings, prophets, or judges came from Reuben's descendants. Simeon and Levi had sinned by killing all the men of Shechem for the rape of their sister Dinah. Jacob said that they would be divided and scattered. So Simeon's descendants became the weakest of the 12 tribes, and Levi's descendants would not gain land. However, later, God blessed the Levites for their faithfulness in the golden calf rebellion during the Exodus 32:26-28, and they were scattered among all the nations to become priests. Judah would be blessed, and his lineage would lead to Jesus. It took 1,600 years for this prophecy to be fulfilled. Jesus is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah, Revelation 5:5. Zebulun would become a haven for ships. His tribe later owned the land between the Mediterranean and the Sea of Galilee, so they owned 2 sea coasts. The tribe of Zebulun also aided David by supplying 50,000 soldiers, 1 Chronicles 12:33. Issachar's descendants will be a strong donkey, but a band of slaves. He had a strong and large tribe, but they were lazy, and their rivals could more easily overtake them. Dan's tribe became idol worshippers. So Jacob said he would be a serpent, by the way. This infers that the Antichrist would come from the tribe of Dan, Daniel 11:37, Jeremiah 8:16. The Dan tribe was not listed in the 144,000, Revelation 7:5-8. It was listed in the tribes that would enter the millennium, Ezekiel 48. Gad would triumph at last. Jeremiah 49:1 showed that many armies oppressed the tribe of Gad. They were eventually triumphant because of God's blessings. Asher. Jacob foretold that Asher's tribe shall yield royal dainties. God blessed Asher's tribe, and they produced not only necessities but luxuries. Deuteronomy 33:24. Naphtali, he gives goodly words. Naphtali's tribe later owned the land along the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus preached, Matthew 4:12-16. Joseph is a fruitful bough. Even though Joseph was a sinful man, he was blessed later in life and became very faithful to God. He was forgiven much, but he loved much, Luke 7:47. Benjamin, a ravenous wolf. His tribe was later known as fierce and very cruel, Judges 19-20. Jacob tells his sons that he wants to be buried in the cave back in Canaan with Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and his wife Leah. So Jacob died at 147 and was the last of the great patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So the 12 tribes of Israel were established, and they would carry on Jacob's lineage. Genesis 50, so Joseph had his father embalmed in the fashion of the Egyptians, a 40-day process. The Egyptians mourned for Jacob for 70 days. Then, with Pharaoh's blessing, Joseph gathered all his family and the elders of Egypt and took his father's body back to Canaan. They stopped to mourn Jacob for 7 days on the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond Jordan. Then they went to Canaan and buried Jacob in the cave per his wishes, and then they all returned to Egypt. Joseph forgave his brothers for all they did against him because it saved the lives of his family and all the Egyptians. Joseph told all the children of Israel that God would someday take them back to the promised land of Canaan. He made an oath with them that they would take his bones with them. Joseph died when he was 110 years old and was embalmed and placed in a coffin. We have finally completed the first book of the Bible. We now know that God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit jointly created the heavens, the earth, and all that is in them. We also have seen that they placed man and animals on the earth, and it was all good. Since God wanted men and angels to love him and to love each other, he gave them free will and everlasting life. God's most beautiful angel, Lucifer, decided that he could be as great as God, and so God cast him and his minions down to earth, and they corrupted the men on earth. So God sent a flood and covered the earth with water. He may have done this twice, the Luciferian flood and Noah's flood. God created Adam and Eve, but Lucifer was still on earth and caused them to sin. Because they fell into sin, despite God's warning, they would have to work the ground for their food and would eventually die. Because of man's continuous sin, God flooded the earth and eliminated all life except for Noah, his family, and pairs of animal species. Noah and his descendants refurbished the earth. Because of sin, God condemned the Canaanite ancestors of Noah's son Ham and blessed Noah's descendants through Noah's son Shem. God sent Abraham to start a nation of people who would worship him and become an example to all men of the earth. God used them to show right from wrong and to show the results of sin and the grace God has for those who show true repentance. Abraham's and Sarah's son Isaac carried their lineage through his son Jacob, and Jacob's 12 sons, whose lineage became the 12 tribes of Israel. God used the Israelite story to prophesy his plan for world history from creation to the last days. We leave the Israelites in Egypt during the Great Famine, and we will continue their history in the next book of Exodus. We have started uploading the videos covering each book of the Bible and plan to add a book every month. As of this writing, the books of Genesis through Ruth are on the channel, including a short 4-minute introduction to the Bible. Please don't forget to click on the like and subscribe buttons below the screen to help us witness to others. You can also leave a comment if you like. We answer all comments. If you would like to send this video to friends or family members, please use the share button below. Then click on the next video icon to continue the journey through the Bible. You can also click on the channel icon to see all the videos available. Thank you for watching this video. May God richly bless you and your family.